To be this good takes ages. To be this good takes Sega. One of the first instances of Sega using player words to advertise and market. And since then they've took this idea and ran with it with the SEGA AGES lineup of game re-releases. Initially finding its roots on the Sega Saturn, the SEGA AGES lineup on said console saw authentic ports of many arcade titles and enhanced ports of Sega Mega Drive games. This series was mostly exclusive to Japan, with only a handful of the games releasing in the West under the name of SEGA AGES Volume 1. A trend we will see repeated in the next iteration, SEGA AGES 2500 on the PS2. This time these classic games saw recoats with 3D graphics for better or for worse. Much like the Saturn series, these games were mainly Japanese exclusive with the exception of the Western released Sega Classics Collection, a compilation of Sega's more well-known arcade games. Come Sega Ages Online on the Xbox 360 and PS3 is when M2 found themselves into the mix, a development studio best known for handling emulation for re-release games to an incredibly high standard. These releases also saw a high number of titles released in the West under the umbrella of the Sega Vintage Collection, from Monster World, ToeJam & Earl, and Streets of Rage collections. Though it wouldn't be until 2018 however that the West would finally have the branding of SEGA Ages once again, with the latest lineup on Nintendo Switch developed by the talent at M2 yet again. These ports saw games from Sega's home consoles such as the Master System and Mega Drive/Genesis to their arcade boards such as the System 2 and Model 1. Released with new modes, a plethora of settings, and even in a few instances, soundtrack releases. But now in 2020 we have seen the Switch range of Sega Ages come to an end, so to celebrate, myself and a few others will be giving our thoughts on the lineup to see if these games are worth your time and money. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Sonic the Hedgehog on Nintendo Switch was one of the two Sega Ages launch titles released back in September of 2018, a line of games that I was eagerly anticipating despite all signs pointing to the series being dead on arrival in the West. This was always going to be the harder of the two launch titles to sell the concept of, despite it including the Blue Blur's name in the title, meaning it will sell a gazillion copies anyway. With a cheap collection just down the pipeline on the same console featuring the same game, M2's console-accurate port of Sonic 1 would have to fight for survival. Also not helping it was the social media backlash around the game, as it's the popular hot take nowadays that Sonic 1 has been ported too many times, not even counting the collections or remakes. So M2 would have to do a really fantastic job to make sure that the fans swallowed it up instead of being the vindictive keyboard warriors they always paint themselves as. The overall fan reception was that this port was uninteresting because anything that isn't Christian Whitehead is not good enough in this day and age, but I'm here to raise the counter-argument that actually I think it's the best way to experience the 1991 classic. Nothing is too different in M2's take on the game, and that's the beauty of it in my opinion. M2 respected the original vision of Naka and the team back in 1990 and 1991 and tries its absolute hardest to keep the restraints of the game intact, while introducing new features to make the experience a little more intuitive. The spin dash is almost a required feature in classic Sonic titles nowadays, so of course it sees an appearance in Sega Ages Sonic 1. One feature that isn't a given however and acts as M2's trump card over the Taxman remake is ironically a feature that he and his team created: the drop dash. It fits so perfectly into Sonic's moveset that now playing the classics without feels a little bit odd, so M2 with help from Iizuka managed to implement it into Sonic 1 and their future port of the second game, which also included it alongside many new features. While it may feel a little inappropriate in certain areas, the parts of the game that let you be a speed freak were calling for a feature like this to be implemented. The speed it gives you could have done with being a little bit faster, as I found that while blasting through Green Hill it was actually causing me to lose momentum in some areas, but I remain thankful that it isn't as overpowered as the move is in Forces. On the subject of time trials, Sonic 1 has a few bonus modes to speak of, the first being a comprehensive Green Hill Act 1 time trial mode. There's just two things to worry about: your own skills and the clock, and all of the enemies in your way too. The milliseconds added to the clock are a thankful addition, as are the exact button inputs that play alongside your replay, which makes this a great mode for speedrunners. That brings me to my next point though, which is, why is this mode restrained to just one level? That made sense for later games in the lineup such as Alex Kidd in Miracle World, where it makes sense to just include the time trials of the iconic stages, but Sonic 1's a game built all around speed. Not only that, but the speedrunning community I just mentioned is large enough to satisfy the existence of an entire game time attack mode in this style, and the exact button inputs shown alongside this replay would instantly make this a popular way to play the game. A very strange move in my opinion on M2's part, and it wasn't corrected for Sonic 2 either. I should mention though, there is a full game time attack in the sense of Mega Play mode. This is a version of Sonic 1 developed for arcades which features a counting down clock, with the aim being to rack up a high score while speeding through selected zones in the game. The reason I don't count this is the complete lack of Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone, which were understandably too slow to remain in the quick arcade romp. Not to mention the one life and you're out policy, which turns away any unseasoned Sonic 1 player quickly. Aside from that one pretty sizable gripe though, Sonic 1 on the Switch is well worth a purchase if you're a fan of the series, and especially if you've not touched the game before. The attention to detail and overall polish it provides to the most dated entry in the mainline series doesn't go unnoticed, but this is definitely one for the accuracy nuts. Otherwise, if you have a smartphone, I'm sure you know where to go by now.
If Sega's acquisition of Technosoft's library was good for anything, then it's definitely the re-releasing of the Thunder Force games. These rock-hard and extremely stylish shooters are some of the Mega Drive's absolute best titles, and Thunder Force 4 might be the pinnacle of the series. Despite the difficulty, Thunder Force 4 at least has the decency to not completely punish the player when they lose a life. With most shoot-em-ups, losing a life means losing all your power-ups, but with Thunder Force 4 you only ever lose the weapon you have equipped. Thunder Force 4 gives you 5 weapons to play around with, all of which can be upgraded, alongside complete control of your ship's movement speed straight out the gate. This adds some real depth to the action, as you often find yourself changing speed to suit the type of environment you fly through or the severity of the enemy's onslaught. Thunder Force 4 also adds some interesting verticality to its stages, meaning there's often more enemies lurking around off screen to get the jump on you. And let's not forget about the music. My god! If there's ever been a soundtrack that really shows off how capable the Mega Drive sound chip is, then this is it. The songs like Metal Squad are the stuff of legend. Thankfully, M2 have seen fit to include a kids mode for Thunder Force 4, helping alleviate some of the maddening difficulty this game is known for, and it's a welcome addition to the overall package. If there's one thing the Mega Drive does well, it's shmups, and Thunder Force 4 is one of the console's very best, maybe even the best.
2020 finally saw Phantasy Star Online 2 released in the West. When I finally got to play the game on its release on Steam, I quickly fell in love with the game and its addicting combat mechanics. After the completion of Episode 1 on PSO2, I became curious about the history of the series' roots, and found myself playing through the SEGA Ages release of the Master System classic, Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star tells a simple yet engaging story of Alice and her journey to avenge her brother's death by defeating the evil King Lassic. The game will see you traverse 3 planets, gathering a party of 4, including a very adorable cat, collecting items and weapons needed to bring peace back to the system of planets. Like many of the early JRPGs, progression can often be confusing and unclear as to where to proceed. Back in its release, Sega would even send out guides and maps to help struggling players, so I would recommend referencing a guide every so often to keep you on track, but not as to the extent to give up the sense of exploration that this game can offer. Talking to the townspeople and exploring lands with some iconic 8-bit music help develop some amazing world building. Throughout the game you'll battle in turn-based encounters in a unique first-person perspective, taking down your enemies with basic attacks and magic, with each character having their own particular strength and weakness. One of the aspects that made this title so enjoyable was the additions and changes made to the game thanks to the SEGA Ages release. The biggest addition being that of maps to help traverse dungeons, which would otherwise be a painful maze to get through. Faster walking speeds with increased XP and money with encounters also help streamline and modernise the game to make the overall experience less tedious. Though, if you wish to experience the game as it was at release, you can play the original unaltered Master System game with the choice of normal or FM audio. Phantasy Star is without a doubt worth a purchase, to experience one of the defining games for JRPGs in the best way possible. It will also give you the most bang for your buck, with the game taking myself around 10 hours to complete, the longest I've spent with a SEGA Ages title.
Get ready.
OutRun graced our tiny Switch screens in 2018, 2019 in the West, after appearances on many home and handheld platforms prior, but with arguably more ports than Sonic 1, it's got a lot to beat out and a large legacy to satisfy. Being a fan of the game and having some spare change, this was one of the games that I picked up from the Japanese eShop, which is a decision well made considering that this was one of the longest waits for an Ages release in the West. Describing the gameplay of OutRun regardless of if you have played it or not is the equivalent of teaching someone how to manually breathe, but I'll explain it anyway for the sake of closure. In OutRun, the goal is to get from A to B with your girl in your not a Ferrari, at least in this version, as quickly as possible, dodging through traffic while maintaining speed and taking various scenic detours along the way. If you played a driving game before, you should roughly understand OutRun. It goes more arcadey than simulatory, but that shouldn't discredit OutRun in the slightest. The gameplay is still as solid as ever, with it being probably the best Yu Suzuki arcade title to date. Sorry Virtua Fighter 2 fans, but if you've played OutRun 1,000,001 times, it's going to feel the exact same in every way as before. As a sorry we don't want to pay for the Ferrari license, the 3DS version introduced new cars which are expanded upon here. Each time you finish one of the available courses, you unlock a new car with stats different between the lot. I know what you're probably thinking, so I'll answer it anyway. Yes, you can combine car parts to create a supercar, and yes, it is entirely broken. Time and difficulty dip switches are provided in the standard Ages menu if you're finding the coin gobbler gameplay a tad too much to handle on top of your custom cars. Ages has always been very good with its accessibility of gameplay options, ignoring languages, so it's nice to see that heavily translate over to OutRun. We've still got some less gameplay oriented options to cover, as in the actual game design. The immediate point of comparison for this release is M2's own 3DS port, released in 2015. This port added in widescreen support, or as wide as the 3DS screen supports, gyro controls, 3D capabilities, and most importantly to me, 2 new music tracks. While this release strips away the 3D support, all other features are maintained. The gyro controls rely on the Joy-Cons or the Pro Controller, meaning third-party controllers or official controllers such as the NES and SNES Online controllers can be discarded, but they feel about as accurate as before. As to say you would only want to use them for the hell of it and you'll be back to buttons within one failed attempt on your first leg of the journey. Finally, proper widescreen support has been added as a result of the Switch's larger screen and the TV output, meaning for those who swear by their 16:9, this release marks the first time you're able to play an official, authentic version of the arcade version in a 16:9 format, and it looks magical. No noticeable popping, no HUD stretching, and sharp graphics all around with the addition of filters if that's your thing. So important to me that I had to put it in my own separate category is the music. Both Cruising Line and Camino at Mi Amor return from the 3DS version as selectable options, and feel as crispy audio-wise as they did back there. Also included the 4 new tracks. Step on Beat from the Mega Drive port, Midnight Highway from the Master System's OutRun 3D, not to be confused with M2's 3D OutRun, Radiation from OutRun 2006, and the 80s as Funk Drivers Megamix Volume 1, a medley remix of the 4 classic OutRun tracks. Overall, Sega Ages OutRun is a really solid port of an already phenomenal game. If you played this before, never touched it, or only pumped coins into the sequel in arcades, this is a must play. Easy to pick up, hard to master, and highly customizable, OutRun on Switch is probably the best way to play the title. If you're a 3D nut, you're not going to get your mileage here, but everything else is transported over or improved upon from the 3DS version. Pick up OutRun on your journeys when you get the chance.
Gameground is a divisive game among players, with many finding it mediocre at best, while many others love it for its unique premise at the time of its release. This arcade game from the late 80s sees you start with a selection of 3 characters as you make your way through hordes of enemies, defeating them and saving fallen characters along the way to add to your roster, each with their own individual moves to learn and master. Like many arcade titles, this game is rather straightforward and easy to pick up in the first few levels, but will later test your skills of extreme difficulty with an adventure lasting 40 levels. But good luck making it through them without a copious amount of credit continues. For me, the game exudes a certain charm to it that I really enjoy. While the music can be rather grating and the gameplay rather repetitive, it has an addictive nature that often finds me launching the game for a few rounds of enemy killing goodness. The game also features multiplayer, which allows the game to be that little bit easier as you defeat the same number of enemies, but now with twice the manpower. In this release, it also included the added mode of Full Member Mode, which sees all characters available from the start if you're just in the mood to quickly kill some virtual enemies. On top of those extras, a fun little addition to the Sega Ages version is the ability to place the Switch on its side to display the game vertically, using the game's aspect ratio to its advantage. A cute little addition that shows another example of M2 going out their way to make these ports the best they can be. If you're interested in experiencing another early Sega arcade title, then this is worthy of a purchase. But if you're not fully invested, you can play the Sega Mega Drive version in the Classics collection available on the Switch, courtesy of D3T. Before Sonic, the face of Sega was Alex Kidd, a young boy who defeats his foes with rock, paper, scissors. When I had previously played Alex Kidd in Miracle World in the past, I had only ever played the first level of the game over and over again, and rarely getting further. So I was quite surprised and intrigued when I finally got to the plot of the game when sitting down to fully play the Ages release. Alex Kidd discovers he is the son of the lost-long king of Redashian, who had been defeated by an evil tyrant, and it's Alex's job to save your royal family and to restore order to the world by defeating Jankin the Great and his henchmen. The game is a 2D platformer as you find yourself jumping, swimming, punching boulders and enemies, and even often getting yourself into vehicles such as a bike or helicopter to help traverse the stages quicker. While fun, the platforming is quite slippery and not as refined as something like Super Mario Bros. But thankfully the SEGA Ages version brings in a rewind feature that takes you back several seconds to attempt the jump or attack again. A feature that very much helped me in completing the game, especially during the game's boss sequences in which you take them on with a round of rock paper scissors, otherwise known in the game as the Japanese name Janken-pon, and can quickly find yourself losing a life if you don't use that rewind feature. Or you can even refer to the game's border as it shows the pattern of the rock paper scissors used in the game. Though the original release is also included, that does not include the rewind feature if you wish to play the game true to its release. This version of Alex Kidd in Miracle World also brings with it a few extras, including a challenge mode in which you must get to the goal as fast as you can, the ability to change between the original and FM audio, and also includes the hamburger version of the game, which is built into the Sega Master System 2 and sees Alex eating a hamburger as opposed to a rice bowl. Alex Kidd is a historical figure in Sega's history, and if you're a Sega fan, you owe it to yourself to play this enjoyable yet flawed platformer. Though, with the beautiful Miracle World remake coming soon that also includes the original game, it makes this SEGA Ages port a tougher sell for those who are still on the fence.
SEGA Ages Puyo Puyo features the original arcade version of Puyo Puyo, developed by Compile and released to arcades in 1992. I had written a whole lot about the history of this game, but for the sake of time, this is the original Puyo Puyo arcade game that would help launch the series into massive popularity in Japan. Puyo Puyo has two defining characteristics: its competitive versus mode and its cast of wacky characters and humorous cutscenes. The latter is perhaps somewhat lost in the strange and obscure English version, which is also included. The core gameplay of Puyo Puyo involves matching 4 blobs or Puyos of the same color. Matches can be chained together, increasing the score given and the amount of nuisance or garbage Puyo sent to the opponent's screen. Whoever hits the top of the screen first loses. While later games in this series would introduce countering and other strategic mechanics, things are pretty basic here. The biggest criticism of this game is that without countering, high-level play comes down to whoever can perform a large chain first. The SEGA Ages version adds a few other refinements from later games though, introducing a second rotate button and the rotation behavior from the game's sequel. Puyo Puyo would of course be ported to numerous platforms including Sega Mega Drive, and infamously served as the basis for many westernized adaptations, such as Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. While future games would refine the game mechanics, if you want to see where it all began, Puyo Puyo is a worthwhile entry in the SEGA Ages lineup.
Originally released in 1992, Virtua Racing is a Formula 1 inspired arcade racer and the first game to utilize Sega's landmark Model 1 hardware, laying the groundwork for the future of 3D polygon-driven gaming.
1, 2, 3, go!
Created by Yu Suzuki and developed by Sega's AM2 division, Virtua Racing was a technical marvel, pushing thousands of polygons at a rock-solid frame rate. Many of its features would become defining characteristics of arcade racing games, setting the stage for even more technically impressive arcade spectacles, such as Ridge Racer and Sega's own Daytona USA. These include innovations like being able to select from multiple tracks of varying difficulties, along with the VR View system, which allows players to choose different camera views while racing. The ability to connect up to 8 cabinets made the game a spectacle to behold for both players and spectators alike. For the SEGA Ages incarnation of Virtua Racing, the masters at development studio M2 have taken care to craft the first arcade-perfect home port of the game, while also improving upon it in almost every conceivable way. The resolution has been brought up to a full 1080p when docked and 720p in handheld mode, all running at a blisteringly smooth 60 frames per second, doubling the original game's frame rate. The draw distance has been improved, and the car handling has been tuned to play great on modern analog controllers. In a very impressive technical feat for the Switch, VR even features the ability for simultaneous multiplayer racing in split-screen mode, which is done by emulating the game in up to 8 separate instances on the same system. The original 3 tracks are available in full to race, as well as dip switch settings for different race lengths and AI difficulty levels available in the game's menus. The only things missing from this port are the additional cars and tracks that were featured in the 32X, Saturn, and PlayStation 2 versions of the game, which is a small disappointment, but SEGA Ages Virtua Racing is an uncompromised masterpiece and the definitive edition of an arcade landmark, making it a must-play standout among the SEGA Ages lineup.
Despite being constantly one-upped by its sequel Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap, Wonder Boy Monsterland is my real favourite from the series, and it was truly wonderful, pun intended, to have it in the SEGA Ages line. Unlike the original game in the series, which is pure time attack action, Monsterland takes influence from role-playing games by being a slower, more considered affair with armour and weaponry to buy and upgrade from various shops scattered around the game world. It doesn't have the huge, sprawling map of Dragon's Trap, or even Monster World, instead focusing on a level-based structure that almost makes it feel like a Castlevania game. While this arcade adaptation definitely benefits from save states, it still gets a tad too difficult for its own good. This is the unfortunate product of being an arcade title made to rinse its player for more credits, and sadly there isn't an easy difficulty option to mitigate this. Still, this is a fantastic entry in the Wonder Boy series, and the first to really show the series' potential. For players that are looking for a little more challenge, there's a raft of extra time attack and score attack modes, as well as a brand new money hungry mode that stops the player from waggling the player back and forth in areas that spawn money in order to glitch it out and receive more money. They certainly help flesh out the package and make this feel like the definitive port of Wonder Boy Monsterland.
Welcome to the Phantasy Zone. Get ready.
Released in the mid-80s in arcades, Space Harrier is one of Yu Suzuki's best works, with its innovative graphics and gameplay. The game sees you play as Harrier, as you navigate a continuous series of 18 different stages while shooting down enemies and avoiding obstacles. A new take on the space shooters that came before it, as not only was it one of the first arcade games to use 16-bit graphics, but also saw you traverse a pseudo 3D environment compared to the more traditional 2D side-scrolling shooters at the time. Accompanying the addictive gameplay and beautiful visuals is one of the most iconic soundtracks to be found in a SEGA game. Different options are also available to make the game easier and increase the speed of your firing to help those who might otherwise be having trouble with the arcade difficulty. But for those who are very new to the game, the SEGA Ages added mode of Kori-Maru attack gives the player extra help by giving you the ability to take more damage and also letting you collide with enemies to destroy them. Great little mode to help new players get up to speed and get the confidence to tackle the original. The game also features motion controls. Holding the Joy-Con and moving it around akin to a joystick will see your character move, while holding down the trigger will see you fire. A cool little novelty that you'll probably only see yourself playing once or twice, as it does remove a lot of the precision from the game. Space Harrier can be found in many SEGA games such as the Yakuza series and Shenmue, but if you have a Nintendo Switch and you want to play this iconic arcade title, the SEGA Ages port is a great choice.
Columns is Sega's obligatory puzzle matching game that isn't Puyo Puyo at a glance, but in truth it's very different to its more anime-infused counterpart. In Columns you have to match at least 3 of the same type of jewel together, and diagonal matching is thrown into the mix too. Columns 2 then offers 2 modes, Flash Columns and Versus Columns. The latter is somewhat self-explanatory and closer to Puyo Puyo setup. It also has an online mode, which is fairly standard for these sorts of games in the Ages line. In Flash Columns, however, which is more or less the main attraction here, it's not about getting the highest score or beating a computer opponent, but digging your way through jewels to reach and destroy all of the flashing pieces on the board. This sounds pretty simple in concept, but don't worry, Columns 2 will make you suffer. For one thing, at nigh random the board will have skull pieces added to it. Destroying these will cause the entire board to shift up a space, which can get you a game over very quickly. Mercifully, you can actually switch the skulls off in the SEGA Ages version, but it doesn't do as much as you'd think to alleviate the difficulty. Columns 2 is, to put it lightly, a very hard game. If this were any other occasion, I probably would just put the game down after 5 or so stages, because that early on, it makes you want to crack your controller in two, in a game with 40 stages. But this is a SEGA Ages release, so they threw in something to tempt me back. the Jewel Case. Beating each set of 5 levels in Columns 2 gives you a fresh entry in this extra little menu, where you can look through the artwork of characters featured in the intro of past Sega Ages games. They even wrote little bios for each character. I really love this, it's a really nice touch that adds a lot of personality to this release. The downside being that to access all of this you have to play more Columns 2. As a big old Sega fan, I made it my mission to get all of these unlocked, and I think I may have been the first person outside of Japan to beat Sega Ages Columns 2. The price of that is I spent 40 hours doing so, as again, Columns 2 will test you. There's some levels that took me absolutely hours to wrangle a solution from, and from that perspective, I can't really recommend Columns 2. It's arguably far more frustrating than it is actually fun to play, and for most people, the Jewel Case won't be enough incentive to pick up this release. That's not to say they didn't try to incentivize people to pick it up a bit further, because Ages Columns 2 also includes a slightly stripped down version of the Mega Drive version of the original Columns. This is a nice little extra to have. The version used here was actually made by M2 for a Yakuza companion app of all things. They've also thrown in something called Infinite Jewels mode, which is basically your stock puzzle game endless mode. On the whole though, Columns 2 just isn't something I can really recommend to anyone but the most die-hard Sega or Columns fans, and even then the biggest Columns fan I know hates Columns 2. The idea of digging through jewels with combos to reach an objective is a pretty fun idea on paper, and certainly a bit more unique than a standard matching puzzler game. In execution, it's far more trouble than it's worth.
Puzzles and action.
If any title stands out when viewed against the rest in the Sega Ages lineup, it's puzzle and action Ichidant-R. It's a weird arcade game featuring the Bonanza brothers as they play as knights against a medieval backdrop. On top of that, it's a collection of 20 minigames with varying tasks and strategies. Ichidant-R is obscure even to a lot of Sega fans, making it an exciting pick for this lineup, but potentially an easy skip for most would-be buyers. But its quirk and charm makes it a valuable addition in a game that shouldn't be skipped. Ichidant-R is a harder sell on a system that has a Mario Party title that was pretty well received, but I found so much value in sneaking the game over to friends' homes as a Trojan horse of sorts. Not many know about the game, so setting it up and forcing a controller into a friend's hand guarantees some bafflement and confusion as you try to navigate through the game. Not all of its minigames are winners, but if you're the devious sort like me, watching your friends grow a tad frustrated at trying to figure out the clunkier games is even more fun. And frankly, strange multiplayer games like this are basically what the Switch was kind of designed for in the first place, which makes it a natural fit and an easy buy, so long as you know you'll be able to wrangle a few friends along for the ride here and there. The only caveat is that if you're mostly in a single player position, the game is more of a novelty solo, and while I like my gaming novelties myself, I find it harder to recommend to any in that circumstance.
In 1987, the Shinobi series was born. A series that would later find its success on the Mega Drive found its roots as a side-scrolling action game, akin to that of Namco's Rolling Thunder. But in my opinion, Shinobi is a significantly more fun experience. The game sees you play as the series' main protagonist, Joe Musashi, as you try to put a stop to the terrorist organization known as ZEED, using your ninja weapons such as a katana, shurikens, and even your special move known as ninja magic, all while trying to save and rescue the children of Musashi's clan. The gameplay, much like Rolling Thunder, not only sees you have to deal with enemies on the ground, but also those above you on rooftops, constantly making sure you're on the lookout as to where the kidnapped children may be to move on to the next stage. Bonus rounds help elevate the game with the inclusion of a first-person shooting aspect, as you throw shurikens to the ZEED ninjas before they can get you. The game features 5 missions each with 3 or 4 stages found within. An average playthrough will not take you very long, but you'll get more enjoyment from the game as you master your ninja skills and take on the missions with less handicaps that the Ages mode presents. Similar to the Alex Kidd release, the ability to rewind your gameplay several seconds is included. This saved my skin many times, as there are plenty of annoying enemy placements that will see you take damage easily or even fall into a pit and lose a life. Other new additions in the Ages mode includes Joe Musashi's signature white attire that allows you to take an extra hit from enemies, along with stun the game with a gun that will one-shot most enemies. But as always, if you wish to play the game as it was originally released, you can do that with no additional gameplay changes. This arcade release is a less common port than the more popular Mega Drive titles, so if you're interested in seeing where it all started, the SEGA Ages Shinobi port is without a doubt worth a shot.
Welcome to the Fantasy Zone. Get ready! Yes, it's another M2 port of Phantasy Zone, and if you've never played an M2 port of Phantasy Zone, then this is absolutely the one to get. Not only do we get the game's original mode, we also get Oopa Oopa mode, which swaps out our main protagonist for a miscoloured doppelganger who has full use of every weapon in the game as long as you keep your coin stock replenished with loads of money. But this won't mean much to you if you aren't already familiar with the original mode. Fantasy Zone is a colourful shoot 'em up with cute character designs. The main goal is to destroy every enemy base, and you can scroll left and right with the stage wrapping around on itself. Enemy attack patterns are extremely varied and quickly get more aggressive with each stage. After clearing a stage of its enemy bases, you take on a boss, and it's here where the game gets a little bit more strategic. The bosses are best dealt with specific weapons you can buy in the in-game shop, which appears occasionally during the main stage itself. Take the money you've gained for destroying enemies and turn it into a powerful attack you can use to quickly dispense the game's many bosses. It's really good stuff, and it all adds a surprising amount of depth to a game that looks friendly and vibrant on the surface. But make no mistake, as you make your way through Fantasy Zone, it soon reveals a game that is anything but friendly. And like a lot of Sega's shoot 'em up offerings, it's a fast, twitchy game that takes practice and patience to really master. Once you've conquered the game's two main modes, you can also take on the game's time attack mode to see how quickly you can beat the thing if you need that speedrun thrill. Another nice touch is the addition of a stage select feature and the ability to use your overall coin stock to give yourself some cash at the start of any stage you decide to jump into. Once again, M2 offer up a feature-rich port of a Sega classic that essentially becomes the definitive way to play Fantasy Zone. Essential stuff if you like a good shooter.
SEGA Ages Puyo Puyo 2 is the definitive way to play Puyo Puyo 2, as it has many quality of life features, as well as a translated menu, character profiles and tutorials on getting started with the game. Online play is supported for random matchmaking as well as the room-based system, which allows you to organize matches and play with your friends. SEGA Ages Puyo Puyo 2 also has color settings that will assist colorblind users, as well as lowering the stage transparency to make Puyo easier to see. Time reversal allows you to rewind up to 60 pieces so that you can correct mistakes and plan the perfect attack against your opponent, which is helpful for the 33 stages of increasing speed and difficulty in endurance mode. Alternate Rules makes a return from the Sega 3D Classics collection and allows you to play against the AI opponents using Hard Puyo, a garbage type which takes 2 clears to remove, as well as Point Puyo, which increases the bonus points and garbage you send to your opponent. This mode is my favorite, as it makes the playstyle interesting to play against opponents with differing playstyles. If you are having trouble completing the game, you may want to select the Limited Puyo Colors mode to lower the amount of Puyo on the playing field. Likewise, the game also has a difficulty slider, which affects how AI opponents react towards you, with 1 being the easiest difficulty and 5 being the hardest. You may also adjust margin time, which is a time limit before garbage gets multiplied, as well as the ability to offset your opponent's garbage, which is one of the key features of Puyo Puyo 2. Overall, I recommend SEGA Ages Puyo Puyo 2 if you're a puzzle action fan who wants the best of what Puyo Puyo 2 has to offer for you.
Sonic 2 is a great example of how to create a perfect sequel. It furthers the foundations laid in the first game to create a more streamlined and fun experience. The concept of Sonic was speed, but in Sonic 1 there were many slow moments, that be for tedious platforming segments or moving boulders. With the creation of the spin dash, however, speed would always be just 2 buttons away, with levels having more of a focus on keeping up your speed with its level design, the decision for zones to be condensed to 2 acts as opposed to 3, giving players a better sense of rushing through different zones. And those zones in question are some of my all-time favourites, with some of the best music to be found in a 2D Sonic game. All these things together has created, for me, my favourite Sonic game of all time. But that's just me praising Sonic 2 in general. How does the SEGA Ages version stack up? While the Sonic 1 SEGA Ages port saw the implementation of the drop dash from Sonic Mania, the spin dash along with the Mega Play arcade rendition of the game, a port not often seen, the Sonic 2 release is pretty bare bones in comparison. The main game is here in all its glory, with the drop dash added, with the only extra mode being that of Knuckles in Sonic 2, a game you'd get if you connected Sonic 2 onto the Sonic & Knuckles lock-on cart. Not the most exciting addition in my opinion, especially as in an interview with M2 back in 2019, they had originally intended to include the cut content such as Hidden Palace Zone and possibly even Genocide City Zone, but unfortunately that did not come to be, and in the end it makes this release feel tacked on, released just to make sales because of the fact that Sonic stars in it. If you're desperate to just play Sonic 2 on the Switch, then this is here for that. But if you want better value for money on the Nintendo Switch, I would say pick up the Sega Mega Drive's Classics collection to experience the game as well as a variety of other Mega Drive/Genesis classics. Or even better, download the free Sega Forever Sonic 2 title on the Google Play or App Store to experience the superior Sonic 2 port developed by Christian Whitehead, which also includes widescreen support and even some cut content. When you think of Sega and fighter jets, you would naturally go to Afterburner, another iconic creation by the genius of Yu Suzuki, where you attempt to survive in a bombardment of attacking fighter jets. An incredible game, and a shame we didn't get it released through the SEGA AGES line. But what we did get, however, is one of Suzuki's more unknown gems and spin-off to that in the title of G-LOC, a first-person jet fighting arcade game from 1990. Unlike Afterburner, which is more of an evasive and defensive game, G-LOC is all about attack. This title sees you shooting down a number of fighter jets in an allotted time frame. Fail to do that or lose all your lives and you've lost the game. A fun and frantic gameplay experience with some beautiful visuals to boot as you pilot around in the first person. The game was noteworthy for having a moving arcade machine at the time of its release, so M2 have done a wonderful job in emulating it for the big screen, a visual addition that I cannot play without now. They even went to the extent of recording the actual arcade machine sounds from the clicking of the trigger to the movement of the cabinet to create the most authentic experience for the player. Prior to the announcement of the port, I had never heard of G-LOC before, but I am very glad I do now. A great little arcade game that had otherwise been lost in time has a new spot in the limelight. I would definitely suggest picking this up for those who had previously enjoyed Afterburner or just want to play a more niche arcade title. Let me start off by saying I am personally not a big fan of the shoot 'em up genre. Something about them just doesn't click for me. Maybe it's the difficulty or just the gameplay not being to my liking. So bear in mind that this review is coming from someone who doesn't particularly enjoy these types of games. So to say I completed the game and enjoyed my time of it is probably the highest compliment I could give Thunder Force AC. Released in late 1990, Thunder Force AC is an arcade retooling of the Mega Drive game Thunder Force 3, an uncommon sight as often the arcade game comes before the home console experience. This game was streamlined from its previous titles and set the standard for the series to come, removing the overhead flying segments of the previous game to solely focus on the side-scrolling gameplay fans enjoy the most. But why should you play Thunder Force AC when Thunder Force 4 is also available through the SEGA AGES line? A game which is objectively more visually stunning in its presentation, not to mention the better music tracks and expanded gameplay mechanics. Well, the answer to that question is simplicity. AC is much more linear in its approach and a slower experience overall. In my opinion, this makes the game much more accessible and easier to pick up and play. With an extra great inclusion for newbies like myself in both Thunder Force Ages releases is that of the Kids mode, which gives players extra credits and perks designed to improve the experience for the first time player. And on the subject of bonus content, M2 have even included 3 unlockable ships with unique characteristics to improve the replayability of the game, which would otherwise rely on the user's drive to improve their scores. While Thunder Force 4 is a better game compared to AC, the more subdued nature of the game makes it more enjoyable for me personally. I find it to be a better starting place for those new to the shoot 'em up genre, but otherwise it's a great port of a game that set the standard for the Thunder Force series that people know and love. Herzog Zwei. Now this was a game I had never heard of before, nor knew how to pronounce it when I first saw the name of the game, but this title on the Sega Mega Drive laid down the framework to the real-time strategy game genre, and a successor to the 1989 game Herzog, the prototype as to what this game would later become. Developed and published by Technosoft, this game sees you pilot a transforming mech as you traverse land and air to gain territory with the ultimate goal of destroying the enemy's base. Building unique units designed for specific tasks, such as taking over territory and attacking enemy units head-on. Not only do you need to keep maintaining the energy of your own ship that can be refueled at your outpost, but it's important to keep an eye on your unit's health and ammo, by creating supply units to keep them ready for combat. All these elements come together to create a hectic game of managing resources as you try to build your army to take on the enemy base. But thankfully M2 has included some extra quality of life improvements that try and help flatten the incredibly large learning curve. Added information is present during the unit construction phase as to better describe and inform what command you are giving it, as well as clearer information on each faction's health. Also included is a great tutorial to help new players such as myself get up to speed. These tutorials are filled with such charm that they are a joy to read through as opposed to the potential bore fest they could have been. That comes down to some amazing humour and SEGA references used throughout. Though while the tutorial did assist in letting me learn some of the core fundamentals of the game, real-time strategy is a genre that is far too complicated for me, but I can still value the amount on offer for this title, especially as there was little to none like Herzog's Zwei before it was released. Local and online multiplayer is also included, so you can take on your friends in a frantic and tactical game. Without a doubt the best way to experience this title, especially if you both have no idea what you're doing. And as the final release, it was great to see SEGA and M2 release another more unknown gem, but a gem that built the foundation for one of PC's biggest gaming genres, inspiring such games as Warcraft, Command & Conquer and StarCraft, as well as being the precursor to the massively popular MOBA genre. If you're a big fan of the genre of RTS or MOBA, you owe it to yourself to pick up this important game in history. And there we have it, the SEGA Ages lineup on Nintendo Switch. Overall, a pretty great selection of titles with some incredible quality of life improvements to these classic games. And while I wish we could have seen the series continue and grow with more niche titles, unfortunately it's just not a sustainable series nowadays. Seeing content creators making videos on these games has opened the door for new fans of classic SEGA and classic games in general. What did you think of the SEGA Ages releases? Did you love them? Did you find them disappointing? Be sure to let us know. And while this lineup has come to an end, that doesn't mean SEGA and M2 will stop working together in the future. So I continue to look forward to their next endeavour.